I was driving home from the title company with the check still folded in my jacket pocket when I realized I was smiling for the first time in 8 months. The house had sold for $620,000. Not what the market was doing 2 years ago, but more than enough, more than I needed. My brother-in-law Carol had been a real estate attorney for 30 years, and he'd told me privately, after the closing, that I'd gotten a fair deal in a buyer's market. Fair was enough. Fair was more than I'd expected when my wife Sandra passed, and left me alone in a 4-bedroom house with a lawn I couldn't keep up with anymore, and a driveway that felt 3 miles long every time it snowed. I'd been a homicide detective for 31 years with the Portland Police Bureau. Retired at 62 with a pension, my health, and the kind of quiet that comes after decades of seeing what people do to each other at their worst. Sandra had been gone 8 months. The house was too large and too full of her, every corner and cabinet a reminder. Selling it was the right thing. I knew that. I'd known it for months before I finally did it. I was going to put $400,000 into a trust account and let my son and his wife know that I intended to leave it to them. The rest I'd use to rent a small 2-bedroom in Beaverton, somewhere with a covered parking space and no yard. Simple, clean, quiet in a different way than grief. My son and his wife had been staying with me since February. He'd been laid off from his project management job in the fall, and they needed somewhere to land while they figured things out. I didn't mind. I genuinely didn't. He was my only child, and I thought it would be good for both of us, having someone else in the house during those first raw months without Sandra. I was thinking about all of this as I turned onto my street. I was thinking about telling them about the closing, about the $400,000 I planned to set aside for their future. I was thinking my son would tear up a little, the way he did sometimes when he was moved, when the moment caught him off guard. I parked in the driveway rather than pulling into the garage. I don't know why. Force of habit from years of showing up somewhere and not wanting to commit before I knew what I was walking into. 31 years of homicide work leaves marks you don't notice until they show up in small choices. The kitchen window was cracked open. It was a warm afternoon for April in Oregon, and the window faced the driveway. I heard my son's voice before I reached the front door. We have to move before he puts it in a trust. Once it's locked up, we can't touch it. I stopped walking. He's going to tell us tonight. My daughter-in-law's voice, lower. He texted me that he had good news. That's the closing. It has to be $400,000 in a trust does us no good. We need liquid. We need it now. I stood in my own driveway, car keys in my hand, the check still in my jacket pocket, and I did not breathe. What are you thinking? She asked. My son's voice dropped, and I took 2 steps closer to the window without making a decision to do so. 31 years of training. There's a doctor. A guy I found through Kessler. He runs a private practice in Tigard. He does competency evaluations for families dealing with aging parents. For the right arrangement, he documents what we need him to document. The word arrangement landed in my chest like a stone dropped into cold water. What does that mean? It means for $2,000, he writes that Dad is showing signs of cognitive decline. Early dementia presentation. We take that to a probate attorney, file for guardianship, and we control his finances before any trust gets established. I heard my daughter-in-law exhale, long and slow. He seemed fine this morning, she said. He is fine. That's not the point. We don't need him to actually be impaired. We need documentation. There's a difference. I backed away from the window the same way I used to back away from scenes I needed to process before entering. Slow, deliberate, no sudden movements. 31 years. I had listened to confessions. I had sat across from men who'd killed their wives and described it in the same tone they'd used to explain a plumbing problem. I had learned not to let my face respond before my mind was ready. I got back into my car and sat there. The check was still in my pocket. My hands were steady because I'd trained them to be steady. Everything else was falling. My son. My son who I taught to throw a baseball in the backyard of the house I just sold, who cried at Sandra's funeral in a way that broke me and also held me up somehow, seeing how much he loved her, who'd been eating dinner at my table for 2 months and asking me how I was sleeping and whether I needed anything from the store. The prosecutor's mind activates differently than the father's mind. One is systematic. The other is simply breaking. I let the prosecutor go first. Evidence. What did I have? An overheard conversation. No recording. No witnesses. I'd spent 3 decades watching defense attorneys dismantle exactly that kind of case. A bitter, aging father claiming his son plotted against him. It would take 20 minutes to shred. I needed them to act. I pulled my phone from my pocket and called Lou Ferreira. We'd worked together for 11 years in homicide before he moved to financial crimes. He'd retired 2 years before me. We still had lunch twice a month. He picked up on the third ring. Mac. He only called me by my last name, Macklin, shortened. Thought you were closing today. I did. I need to talk to you. Not on the phone. A pause. Lou had heard that tone in my voice before. We both had from each other over the years. The tone that meant something real had happened. Coffee place on Burnside. 20 minutes. I put the car in reverse and backed out of my driveway without going inside. I told Lou everything in the parking lot because the coffee place was too loud and I couldn't sit down. He leaned against his truck and listened the way he always listened, without interrupting, without changing expression. When I finished, he looked at the middle distance for a moment. "The doctor in Tigard," he said. "You catch a name?" "No, Kessler. You know that name?" "No." Lou nodded slowly. "I might. Let me make a call." He looked at me directly then. "You understand you can't confront them?" "Not yet. I know. And you can't tell them about the closing tonight the way you planned. You have to act like nothing's changed." That was the part that required something I'd never had to deploy against my own son. I'd gone undercover once, briefly, early in my career. I hadn't liked it. I wasn't built for sustained deception. But I'd spent 31 years reading people, which meant I'd also spent 31 years understanding what they were reading in me. I knew how to control the signal. "I can do it," I said. Lou made his call while I walked 2 laps around the parking lot. When he came back, his expression had changed in a small way that told me something. "Kessler is Marcus Kessler, small-time civil attorney in Beaverton. He's got a file. Nothing proven but 2 prior complaints from adult children of clients, alleging he steered them toward fraudulent guardianship proceedings. Both complaints went nowhere because the families settled." Lou looked at me. "The doctor in Tigard. If Kessler is placing referrals, I've got a guess. There was an investigation 2 years ago into a Dr. Alton Graves, licensed clinical psychologist. 3 families. Evaluations that didn't match the subject's actual cognitive function. The case went cold when the key witness moved out of state. Alton Graves." I made myself remember the name without writing it down. "I need recording equipment," I said. "I know somebody." Lou was already texting. Voice activated. "Audio quality that holds up in court. You'll have it tonight." I drove back home in the early evening light, pulled into the garage this time. Sat for a moment with my hand on the steering wheel. The house smelled like whatever my daughter-in-law had made for dinner. Something with garlic. For 8 months this smell had been a comfort. Someone else cooking in Sandra's kitchen, the house feeling less like an exhibit and more like a place people lived. I walked in carrying the same expression I'd carried into hundreds of interrogation rooms. Neutral, open, present. There he is. My son stood up from the couch. He was smiling, and it was a real smile, and that was the hardest part of the whole evening. "How'd it close?" "Smoothly," I said. "Carol handled everything, walked out with a check." My daughter-in-law came in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "That's wonderful. Congratulations. Thank you." I set my keys on the hook by the door, exactly where I always put them. "Something smells good. Chicken marsala." Another 45 minutes. I sat in my chair and accepted the beer my son brought me, and I told them the short version of the closing, the paperwork, Carol's handshake, the drive home. I left out the number, let them think I was processing. Let them think I hadn't decided yet what to do with the money. "You must be relieved," my daughter-in-law said. She was watching me carefully, not in the way a concerned daughter-in-law watches a grieving father, in the way someone watches something they want. "Tired," I said, "mostly tired." My son nodded. We were thinking. "After dinner, maybe we could sit down and talk through your plans, the financial stuff, just so you're not dealing with it alone." "That sounds good," I said. "Let's do that." I excused myself before dinner, under the pretense of washing up. Lou's contact had left a small package in my mailbox as promised, a voice-activated recorder no larger than a USB drive, and a second unit shaped like a shirt button. I'd checked the mailbox when I pulled in, pocketed both. In the bathroom I read the instructions. Simple. These were not complex devices. They were designed for people who needed them in a hurry, which described my situation exactly. I clipped one unit beneath the lip of the kitchen table. The second I kept in my shirt pocket, both activated by sound above a certain threshold, both time-stamped, both with audio quality Lou had described as courtroom ready. Over dinner, I was the tired widower processing a significant financial transition. I asked questions about their lives, their plans, how the job search was going. My son talked about a position he was interviewing for in Seattle. My daughter-in-law talked about wanting to get her real estate license. I listened and I smiled, and I refilled my water glass twice. After dinner, my son cleared the table, and my daughter-in-law refilled her wine, and we sat in the living room, and they began. "Dad, we just want to make sure you have support around this," my son started. "Selling the house. It's a big emotional transition on top of everything with Mom. It's a lot for one person to process." "We've been doing some research," my daughter-in-law said. "There are financial advisors who specialize in situations like yours. Retirees navigating significant asset changes." "I appreciate that," I said. "There's also," my son paused in a way that looked rehearsed. "We've been thinking about your cognitive health, just as a precaution. You've had a really hard year. Grief affects the brain. We thought it might be worth getting a baseline evaluation. Nothing scary, just a professional assessment." There it was. "What kind of evaluation?" I asked. "A clinical psychologist. Just a cognitive baseline. Peace of mind. Do you have someone in mind?" My daughter-in-law looked at my son, a glance that passed too quickly. "We actually do. A doctor in Tigard, a Dr. Graves. He comes highly recommended, Graves," I said. "I'll look him up." My son smiled. "We can set it up for you, make it easy. You shouldn't have to manage all these logistics on your own right now." "I'll think about it," I said. "I'm tired tonight. Let's pick this up tomorrow." I went to bed at 9. Lay on top of the covers, fully dressed with my phone on my chest. At 9:42, I heard them in the kitchen. The recorder in my pocket was running. Later, listening through my earbuds, I would hear everything clearly. My daughter-in-law's voice first. "He didn't bring up the number. How much did it close for?" "He'll tell us tomorrow. He trusts me." My son. And the confidence in his voice was a specific kind of thing. The confidence of a person who believes the other person's love is a weakness to be used rather than a fact to be honored. "Graves can see him Thursday." Kessler said 2 weeks from the evaluation to the guardianship filing. "Assuming the documentation is clean, it'll be clean. Graves knows what we need. And if he puts the money in a trust before then..." "He won't. He said he's tired. He's not going to do anything this week. I know how he operates when he's overwhelmed. He shuts down. We have time." I listened to them describe me like a problem with a timeline, the trust issue, the need to move before I consulted an attorney, the approximate value they were expecting based on comparable sales in my neighborhood, which they'd apparently looked up, which meant they'd been watching this for longer than February. Since Sandra died. That was when the calculation had started, possibly before. I texted Lou at 10:15, Thursday. "Dr. Alton Graves, Tigard. They're setting up the appointment. I have audio of tonight's conversation." His response came within 2 minutes, sending to my contact at Financial Crimes, Detective Yolanda Park. "She worked the original Graves investigation. She'll want to meet tomorrow." I forwarded the audio file to Lou. "Lay back down." There was a photograph on Sandra's side of the nightstand that I hadn't moved. Her and my son at his college graduation. She was laughing at something off camera. He had his arm around her, and he was looking at her instead of the camera. The way you do when you love someone more than you love the record of the moment. That person existed. I was not inventing the good years. But people change, and debt changes people faster than almost anything else. I didn't know yet what they owed or to whom. I would find out eventually. In the meantime, I had a job to do. I met Detective Park the next morning at a diner near the airport. She was in her mid-40s, sharp-eyed, ordered black coffee, and asked no unnecessary questions. Lou had briefed her. She'd listened to the audio on the drive over. "The Graves case never closed cleanly," she said. "We had strong suspicion, but the documentation chain was weak. The families were embarrassed, and the victims, the parents, 2 of 3 were actually showing some early cognitive symptoms, so it was murkier than your situation." "My situation is clean," I said. "Yes." She looked at me steadily. "You're a retired homicide detective who overheard the conspiracy, preserved contemporaneous audio evidence, and is currently in full cognitive command. Their attorney is going to have a difficult time with that. I want them to complete the transaction," I said. "I want Graves caught with cash in hand. I don't want this to go sideways on a procedural issue." Park nodded. "Agreed. We let them take you to the appointment. We have surveillance outside. The moment money changes hands and fraudulent documentation is initiated, we come in." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. You understand what you're asking to do, sitting in that office, playing the role. I spent 31 years asking other people to do harder things than this. She held my gaze. You did. I know your record. A pause. I'm sorry about your wife. Thank you. We worked out the details. Surveillance would establish on my block by 6 Thursday morning. Park would coordinate with Lou and 2 officers from financial crimes. When my son's car left my driveway heading toward T-Guard, they would follow at interval. They'd identified Graves's office address from his licensing records. I had 2 days to maintain the performance. That evening I told my son I'd thought it over, and I was willing to see Dr. Graves on Thursday. That's great, Dad. He put his hand on my shoulder. I'll confirm the appointment. I appreciate you looking out for me, I said. He smiled. He believed it. Wednesday, I did ordinary things. I walked 2 miles in the morning, ate lunch at the counter of a Vietnamese place I liked on Hawthorne, called my brother-in-law Carol, and told him to hold off on the trust documentation for a few days without explaining why. Carol asked if everything was all right. I told him it was. I sat in the backyard that afternoon and looked at the garden Sandra had planted, and thought about the fact that this was the last time I would sit in this yard since the sale had closed, and I would need to be out in 3 weeks. I thought about what 31 years of doing the right thing looked like from the outside. James had written that note to his brother in the other story. Nobody had written me a note. Nobody had said, you spent 3 decades putting bad people away, and coming home, and loving your wife, and raising your son, and paying your taxes, and being, essentially, a decent person. Nobody kept a ledger on that. You just did it because it was who you were, or tried to be. My son had watched all of that. He'd grown up in the shadow of it, and somewhere between watching it and inheriting it, something had bent. I didn't sleep much Wednesday night. I thought about the conversation I would never have with Sandra about this. She would have known what to say. She always knew what to say when I brought the weight of the work home, when I'd seen something that wouldn't leave. She had a way of returning things to their actual size without minimizing them. I missed her in a way that had no language and required none. Thursday morning I came downstairs at 8. My son had already made coffee. My daughter-in-law sat at the kitchen table with her phone. They were both dressed more carefully than usual. My son had his nice jacket on. Ready, he said. Let me get my jacket, I said. In my room I checked the recorder in my pocket, adjusted it, looked at myself in the mirror over Sandra's dresser for a moment. Old man, 64 years old, 31 years of service, pension, health, 1 son. A house I'd just sold and a check in the amount of $620,000 folded into a bank envelope in the dresser drawer. The performance required was not complicated. It required me to be what they already believed I was. Tired. A little slow. Trusting because I'd always been trusting with my son, because that's what love does. It extends trust past the point where evidence might suggest you shouldn't. I went downstairs and got into the back seat of my son's car. The drive to Tigard took 35 minutes. My son played the radio low. My daughter-in-law turned once to ask if I was comfortable. I said yes. I watched the side mirror from my seat and caught, at one point, the gray sedan that had been 2 cars back since we left the neighborhood. Park's team. Graves's office was in a professional building off Pacific Highway that had seen better decades. The lobby directory listed him under psychological services. The elevator was slow. The waiting room was smaller than I expected. No receptionist. A fish tank with 3 fish in cloudy water. Magazines from the previous year. Graves came out to greet us. Late 50s, reading glasses hanging from his collar, a handshake that was practiced and not quite convincing. His eyes went to my son and daughter-in-law first, and that told me everything I needed to know about who he considered the actual clients. Mr. Macklin, come on in. Your family is welcome to wait here. I shuffled slightly, looked at my son. Will you come with me? I don't like doctors. My son hesitated, looked at Graves. Graves nodded, a minor adjustment to the plan. We went into his office. I sat in the chair he indicated. My son sat to my left. My daughter-in-law had stayed in the waiting room. Graves went through the forms. Date of birth, insurance information, reason for visit. I answered slowly, occasionally looking at my son as though for reassurance. I got one question wrong intentionally on the cognitive screening, transposing 2 digits in a serial subtraction task. Just one, enough. Graves took notes, asked me about memory lapses, sleep, appetite, whether I'd noticed difficulty managing finances or making decisions. Sometimes things feel overwhelming, I said. Truthful. Grief was, in fact, overwhelming. I was simply letting him interpret the source incorrectly. After 20 minutes, he leaned back. "I'd like to speak with your son for a moment, if that's all right. Why don't you step out to the waiting room and sit with your daughter-in-law?" I nodded, stood slowly, and went to the waiting room. I sat next to my daughter-in-law and picked up a magazine and listened to the muffled sound of voices behind the closed office door and waited. 4 minutes later, my son emerged. He looked satisfied in a controlled way. "Ready to head out?" he said to me. "What did he say?" "We'll talk at home." It was positive. "He's going to put something together for us." For us. I followed them to the elevator. As we waited for it, my son's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, typed a quick reply. I caught the name at the top of the message thread before he pocketed it. Kessler. Moving fast. The elevator doors opened, and so did the stairwell door behind us. Detective Park came through it first, 2 officers behind her. She had her badge raised, and her voice carried the flat authority of someone who'd done this many times. "Nobody move. Portland Police Financial Crimes Division." My son's arm went out, the instinct to put himself between me and what was happening, but the orientation was wrong. He wasn't protecting me from them. He couldn't orient quickly enough to understand the geometry of what was occurring. "Raymond Macklin?" Park said to me. "Yes, we've got it from here. Are you all right?" "Fine," I said. My son turned to me. His face had gone the color of old paper. "Dad, what is this?" Not a question. A statement of beginning to understand. "I heard you, Sunday afternoon, through the kitchen window." I kept my voice even. The doctor in Tigard, the $2,000, the guardianship filing before I could establish the trust. I looked at him directly. "I heard all of it, Dad. I was a homicide detective for 31 years. The words came out quietly. Not angry, just precise. "You knew that. You grew up knowing that, and you thought I wouldn't recognize what you were doing." My daughter-in-law had her hand over her mouth. She was pale. My son said nothing. There was nothing to say. The recordings existed. The conversation with Graves was being captured by the unit in my shirt pocket. Kessler's name was on his phone. The money had not yet changed hands, but the attempt was documented, and the documentation was clear. Park read them their rights in the hallway. Officers went back into Graves's office. I stood by the elevator and felt the building breathe around me. Lou appeared from around the corner. He'd been with the team. He walked up next to me and didn't say anything. We were good enough friends for that. The check was still in the drawer at home. $620,000 folded into a bank envelope. Still mine. Still mine to trust or account or disperse as I chose, freely, without guardians, without anyone deciding for me what I was capable of. Lou drove me back to the house. The house that wasn't quite mine anymore, 3 weeks left on the possession date. I'd need to find the apartment in Beaverton faster than planned. New circumstances. I was good at adapting to new circumstances. 31 years. I called Carol from the driveway. "The trust documentation," I said. "I'm ready to move forward. Can we do it this week?" "I can make Thursday work," he said. Then, carefully, "Is everything okay, Ray?" "It is now," I said. "I'll explain when I see you." Inside, the house was very quiet. My son's shoes were by the door, my daughter-in-law's coat on the hook beside mine. The remnants of a life that had been partly real and partly preparation for theft, and I couldn't fully separate the two, and I suspected I never would. I sat at the kitchen table, and the house held its silence around me, and I thought about Sandra, about the graduation photo on the nightstand, about the backyard garden, about the question that had no clean answer. At what point had my son started calculating, and how much of the love before that point had been genuine, and did it matter? I didn't know. I had evidence, and I had charges, and I had a trust account that would now go to Carol's discretion, and a children's hospital foundation Sandra had cared about. I did not have answers to the questions that actually hurt. That's the thing nobody tells you about justice. It gives you the right outcome, and it gives you the process, and it gives you the verdict eventually. What it doesn't give you back is the version of the story where none of this happened, where your son sat across from you at that kitchen table and was simply your son, and the inheritance news made him cry in the good way, and you all had dinner and made plans, and the house sold, and the next chapter started clean. That story was gone. I poured a glass of water and stood at the window and watched the neighbor's dog cross the yard next door and disappear behind the fence. Ordinary life continuing. The machinery of my days requiring attention regardless. Apartment in Beaverton. Trust documentation Thursday. A phone call to the Children's Hospital Foundation when things settled. I was 64 years old and I had done the right thing. That part, at least, was still true. Still mine in the way the check was mine, documented and undisputed. I picked up my phone and looked at it for a moment, then set it back down. Some nights you don't call anyone. Some nights you just let it be what it is.